Friends, I start this week's Virginian Vault with a proclamation. Trampas has returned. I knew it would happen at some point, I just didn't think it would be this soon. We're talking like next episode from the time I last mentioned it. Sitting down tonight to chat the Virginian, we are discussing Season 3, Episode 26, entitled Dangerous Road. So let's get that IMDb plot synopsis out of the way. Trampas escorts a murderer back to town where he knew the sheriff. There's a question of the man's innocence, plus Trampas learns the sheriff died in a horse accident 2 days later. He decides to investigate the questionable stories. So this is fully and completely a Trampas episode. We're talking like so much of a Trampas episode, he's not even in Medicine Bow. We get about 2.5 minutes of Riker right at the beginning. Interestingly, this murder mystery, I guess, felt like somewhat of an oddity, especially around this stretch of episodes. Almost immediately, and this could very well be my DVD copy, so I mentioned that, with a little skepticism on my part for what I'm seeing. The color felt a little strange in this one, felt a little more muted, I guess. It almost reminded me of like that colorization you see on copies of Bewitched and things that were electronically and made color. And then some really interesting shot compositions that definitely jumped out as different. Some interesting close-ups and different angles. And I was checking to see if the cinematographer and the director was different than in previous episodes. And for those wondering, according to IMDb at least, director Maurice Garrity directed predominantly in westerns and thrillers in television. He has 14 directorial credits, things like Bonanza, Daniel Boone, Laramie, Whiplash. He is credited on 6 episodes of The Virginian between seasons 1, 2, and 3. This is actually the final episode that he would direct for the series. This episode stood out, I suppose, a lot like our last discussion on season 3, episode 25, Timberland, from a perspective of casting. This starts right up at the top with Robert Pine making an appearance as he's billed in IMDb, young Bob Coulter. So he is a young man who Trampas has to return to his hometown to face up against a murder charge that he's been trying to escape from. Now this is Robert Pine smack dab at the beginning of his career. Classic TV people out there, I'm certain, will recognize him for his long-running role on Chips in, the 1970s, 1980s. The youngsters out there who might not know Robert Pine will undoubtedly recognize him as Chris Pine's father, because I recognized even some Chris Pine in there before I looked at the IMDb and realized that this was in fact Robert Pine. His earliest credits come in 1965 when this episode was released. We are still roughly in March 1965. He began getting television work really right in 1965. He's credited in a 1965 episode of Wagon Train, and then the military comedy Broadside, things like Convoy. This is actually not his first episode of The Virginian. He had a blink and you miss it role just a little before this, actually, in season 3, episode 19, 6 Graves at Cripple Creek. He plays like a military corporal, like a military secretary. Very much a blink and you miss it. And then in other main roles, you also have Simon Oakland, best known. He's in West Side Story, he's in Psycho, he's in Bullet. If you don't know the name, you undoubtedly know the face. But in an embarrassing revelation, I do have to admit that for a long time, I had Simon Oakland face blindness and had a heck of a time keeping him apart in my brain from Neville Brand. They all kind of occupied the same gritty character actor space. The episode also features a bit of a blink and you miss it role from Ben Johnson, the action tough guy and Western mainstay. Had been around the movie industry going back, looking at IMDb at least, deep into the 1940s and the very late 1930s. And he is best known by new Hollywood audiences for his Oscar-winning role in The Last Picture Show, the Peter Bogdanovich film. I will admit, Johnson is one I've only recently kind of put a name to the face to. Watching Last Picture Show and really diving into the Westerns, because I'm very much a neophyte, especially in these mid 1950s, 1960s Westerns. And then he was in a darling TV movie that I need to check out again because I should talk about it on this channel. At this point, I have to give a fast shout out to my shag carpet cinema people for Runaway, the 1973 TV movie, where Johnson appears as the engineer of a runaway ski train that people like Ben Murphy and Ed Nelson and Martin Milner and Vera Miles have to bring under control. It is one of those 1970s disaster TV movies, and definitely worth a watch if you're at all like me and like the weirdness of a big cast disaster TV movie where it's not always that exciting. So I'll just preface that. However, back to the Virginian. And the last name I have to call out here, only because I started diving in while I was watching it. I found it really interesting. True Boardman appears in a relatively small role as a town doctor. And he spent most of his time writing, especially after, I would say, the 1940s. Looking through his filmography, he's credited on everything from Abbott and Costello movies like Keep 'Em Flying, Ride 'Em Cowboy, Pardon My Sarong, through, some action films in the 1940s, and then jumps to TV, where he seems to settle in nicely into Westerns. He is credited as writer on 16 episodes of The Virginian through the middle of the run, seasons 2 through season 9. But then he also enjoyed a acting career with roles going back as far back as 1912, of all things. So the earlier days of silent film, where he recurs in the Bronco Billy short film series. Silent has never particularly been my strong suit outside of like the Buster Keatons and Harold Lloyds, but I'm definitely interested in learning some more, especially that early era, the shorts and the serials, and it fascinates me, and there's so much more to learn that I definitely don't have in my brain. I thought this was a really good episode for Doug McClure, specifically as Trampas. And I don't think I've said it in this series. I need to talk more about Doug McClure. I have a profile that I've had half written for a long time because as a youngster who grew up on The Simpsons, Troy McClure was always a character that fascinated me, and learning that Doug McClure was one of the figures who they based Troy McClure off just captivated me, fascinated me, made me want to learn more. 2025 was the year of Doug McClure for me in my filmography, and there's so much to talk about because there's so much goodness and delightfulness in his filmography. So stay tuned for more Doug McClure discussions here on Piercing Pop Culture. This is an episode that tries to do a lot. There's romance, there's mystery, there's action. There's a very good action sequence, a great fight scene between McClure and actor Tom Reese at the end of the episode, and it really stood out. I was digging through TV Academy interviews, looking at Westerns and the Virginian specifically, and one of the things I kept hearing from the different Virginian interviews was McClure's strength at action scenes and his ability to know where the camera was at all times. And I really kind of noticed that in this fight scene. It was very solid, very frenetic. It definitely felt a level up from some of the Virginians' other fights. It almost ranked closer to something like Laramie with gritty nature of it. But this one, so far away from Medicine Bow, well, it's a great one for McClure. It was a little bit of, not a slower one, but I think I maybe wanted more elsewhere. Had this been set around Shiloh, around had some of the other characters in there, I would have found this a really interesting one, but this definitely felt like potentially a placeholder, but one to get shot in there just to give other people a break, because like I did mention in the last episode, James Drury and Clu Gulager had been really taxed and appearing in a lot of episodes on their own. Continues my fascination to learn more about the behind the scenes on this show and keep digging into it, because this is a very captivating world. I'm going to go ahead and bring this episode of the Virginian Vault to a close. Thank you so much for joining me here at Piercing Pop Culture. I hope to be getting back up to speed here, as I haven't been. Check out my review of Ready or Not 2, which was dropped earlier this week, as I sometimes do contemporary films. And I have some archival Virginian Vaults popping up, some older episodes that I wrote about but didn't speak about, that I'm going to go ahead and get recorded. Hopefully some shag carpet cinemas, and there's just a couple movies that I want to talk about because, they're fun and I enjoy them. So stay tuned for the regular drops, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me here at Piercing Pop Culture. Have a good one all.